the Alberta Public Health Act, Article 38.1, where the Lieutenant Governor in Council is satisfied that a communicable disease referred to in Section 20.1 has become or may become epidemic, or that a public health emergency exists, the Lieutenant Governor in Council may do any or all of the following. Now look at subsection C. In the case of a communicable disease, order the immunization or re-immunization of persons who are not then immunized against the disease or who do not have sufficient other evidence of immunity to the disease. Number 3. Where a person refuses to be immunized, pursuant to an order of the Lieutenant Governor in Council, the person shall be subject to this part with respect to the disease concerned as if the person were proven to be infected with that disease. So what we are seeing here in the statutory law is that the government actors have been granted the power to force a person to be vaccinated, to force a person to take an immunization shot. And if you protest or if you refuse to take that shot, then they will consider you to be a carrier of the disease, the carrier of the COVID-19. Even though you may not be an actual carrier of the coronavirus, the statutory law allows them to treat you as if you are infected because you're refusing to be vaccinated. So the first thing that we should notice here is that they're trying to make vaccinations mandatory. And as you're going to see as you follow in this video, if you don't take the vaccination, there's going to be a lot of consequences placed upon the person's life through this statutory law. So we're looking into the definition section of that enactment, and it says a carrier means a person who, without apparent symptoms, so you're not displaying any symptoms, of a communicable disease, harbors and may disseminate an infectious agent. So may. Not even shall, but you could. You could be carrying a disease and you could be spreading it. Now, for the purpose of this section, person infected with a communicable disease, referred to in subsection 1, and a person who is suffering from a communicable disease, referred to in subsection 2, include the following persons: a person entering Alberta after having traveled internationally, a close contact of a person who is confirmed as having COVID-19, a person exhibiting any of the following symptoms that are not related to the person's pre-existing illness or health condition: a cough, a fever, a shortness of breath, a runny nose, or a sore throat. So if you exhibit any of those symptoms, then they can claim that you have a communicable disease, even if you don't have COVID-19, even if you just have the regular flu. This statutory power is saying that if you exhibit a cough, a fever, shortness of breath, runny nose, or sore throat, we can take it as meaning that you have COVID-19, the coronavirus. Now look at the next definition section. Contact means any person or animal suspected to have been in association with an infected person or animal or in a contaminated environment to a sufficient degree to have had the opportunity to become infected. So you don't even have to be really infected with the coronavirus under this statutory power. You just have to be in a situation or in a place where you've had the opportunity to become infected, and they can grab a hold of you. They can lay a hold of you now. Article 22. Where a health practitioner, a teacher, or a person in charge of an institution knows or has reason to believe, there again, reason to believe, that a person under the care, custody, supervision, or control of the health practitioner, teacher, or person in charge of an institution is infected with a communicable disease prescribed in the regulations, meaning COVID-19, the coronavirus, for the purpose of this subsection, The health practitioner, teacher, or person in charge of an institution shall notify a medical officer of the health right away. Now it goes on to say, where a physician, community health nurse, midwife, or nurse practitioner knows or has reason to believe that a person is infected with a disease prescribed in the regulations for the purpose of this section and refuses or neglects to submit to a medical examination for the purpose of asserting whether the person is infected with that disease, or B, to medical, surgical, or other remedial treatment that has been prescribed by a physician and that is necessary to render the person non-infectious, or to comply with any other conditions that have been prescribed by a physician as being necessary to mitigate the disease or limit the spread to others, the physician, community health nurse, midwife, or nurse practitioner shall immediately notify a medical officer of health of a regional health authority in the prescribed form. Where the medical officer of the health is satisfied as to sufficiency of the evidence that the person may be infected, the medical officer of health shall issue a certificate in the prescribed form. So here, the statutory power is very clear, and we'll walk through it very slowly. In Article 39.1, it says, where a physician, so your physician, or a community health nurse, a midwife, or a nurse practitioner, or a teacher, or other people in positions of authority, if they suspect you to have a disease, and you refuse or you neglect to submit to a medical examination for the purpose of asserting whether you are infected with that disease, with the COVID-19, if they send you a form and they say, we ask you to come take a test, and you don't come take a test, well, then you're going to go on a list. Now, if you refuse to submit to medical, surgical, or other remedial treatment that has been prescribed by a physician that is necessary to render the person non-infectious, well, how do they render a person non-infectious? By immunization, by vaccines. So if you refuse treatment and you refuse to submit to medical intervention, which includes vaccine, then what will transpire is that they will issue a certificate against you. Now, what is this certificate that they're talking about? Now, this issue of certificate, the definition is as follows. Certificate means a compulsory examination and treatment certificate. So notice the designation of that. It's compulsory. You must submit to examination and you must submit to treatment. Authority of certificate. A certificate is authority for any peace officer to apprehend the person named in it and convey the person to any facility specified by the medical officer of health who issued the certificate within 7 days from the date of the certificate is issued. For a physician to perform any test or physical examination required to determine whether that person has a communicable disease, and to detain that person at the facility for the period required to obtain the results of the examination. C. For any physician to treat or prescribe treatment for that person in order to render that person non-infectious with or without the consent of the person, and to detain the person for that purpose, and for a physician to prescribe any other conditions necessary to mitigate the disease or limit the spread to others. So we are clearly seeing what's going on here in this statutory power that was created through legislation. It says that a physician can order treatment upon a person, and that person does not have to give consent to the treatment. And the treatment is to stop the spread or mitigate the spread of the disease. Further, in Article 29, it says that a medical officer of health who knows or has reason to suspect the existence of a communicable disease or a public health emergency within the boundaries of the health region in which the medical officer or health has jurisdiction may initiate an investigation to determine whether any action is necessary to protect the public health. So this subsection here, Article A, we're already in. So they've taken analyzation of what's going on, and they realize that there's a communicable disease out there called coronavirus COVID-19, where the investigation confirms the presence of a communicable disease, COVID-19, the medical officer of health shall carry out the measures that the medical officer of health is required by this Act and the regulations to carry out, and may do any or all of the following: take whatever steps the medical officer of health considers necessary to suppress the disease in those who may already have been infected with it, to protect those who have not already been exposed to disease, to break the chain of transmission and prevent spread of the disease, and to remove the source of infection. So what are they referring to here when they mention these things? How are they going to do that? How are they going to suppress the disease in those who may already have been infected with it? How are they going to protect the rest of them who have not been exposed to disease? And how are they going to break the chain of transmission and prevent the spread of the disease? In section 38C, it gives us the answer. It says that the healthcare practitioner, in the case of a communicable disease, can order the immunization or re-immunization of persons who are not then immunized against the disease or do not have sufficient or other evidence of immunity to the disease. Now remember, this doesn't take your consent. We just saw before that they said they can order treatment with or without your consent. And this treatment that they're going to order against the COVID-19 coronavirus is going to include immunization, a vaccine. They're forcing injections upon individuals, well, upon persons in the statutory world. Article 44 says, where one physician, supported by a laboratory report demonstrating evidence of an infectious agent. So, you know those tests that they're forcing people to take or want people to take that are giving false positives? If one physician comes back with a test that says you are positive, then you can be ordered into isolation, even though that test could be false positive. Or two physicians certify that a person is infected with an organism that produces a disease prescribed in the regulation for the purpose of this section. So all it takes is two physicians to verbally declare that they believe you have the coronavirus, and now you're considered a carrier, even though there's been no laboratory report, no coronavirus test. This is the power that the statutory regulation is giving them. Now it says, if you are been declared a carrier, then A, you have to submit to medical, surgical, or other remedial treatment, or to comply with any other conditions that have been prescribed by a physician as being necessary to mitigate that disease or to limit its spread to others. The physician or physicians shall each issue an isolation order in the prescribed form. Now, what is this medical and remedial treatment that they want to force you to submit to? Well, again, it's very clear in Article 38. It says that if this is the case in a communicable disease, then you are going to be ordered to take a vaccine. And you are going to be ordered to take that immunization. And if you don't take that immunization, you're refusing treatment. And then you will be put into isolation. So they're going to hold you in isolation until you accept treatment, until you accept to go through the prescribed treatment that they want to put you through. And as we saw, the prescribed treatment in the enactment, the treatment they want you to submit to is the vaccination. And if you refuse, they're going to put you in isolation. Now, an isolation order under Section 44 is authority for a health practitioner to observe, examine, care for, treat, obtain biological specimens from, control, and detain in a facility the person named in it with or without that person's consent until the order is cancelled under Section 46. A person is in respect of whom isolation is ordered under Section 44 shall be re-examined by a physician at least once every 7 days to ascertain whether that person may be released under Section 46. So here they're saying that with or without your consent, you're going to be put into isolation because you're refusing treatment, and that treatment is the vaccination. And once every 7 days, once you're put into isolation, then the doctor is accountable to come and see you and to ascertain or to decide whether you could be released. Now, the conditions of being released, as we saw before in the prior articles of this statutory power, is that you submit to the medical treatment that the physicians are ordering in order to mitigate the spread of this disease. And the treatment, the medical treatment that they want to order, is the vaccination of all individuals or all persons. If you're a carrier, a person who, without apparent symptoms of a communicable disease, harbors and may spread an infectious agent, or if you're a person exhibiting a cough, a fever, shortness of breath, a runny nose, or a sore throat, or if you're a person who's had contact with any other person or animal suspected to have been in association with an infected person or animal, or in a contaminated environment, to a sufficient degree to have had the opportunity to become infected, then they are going to consider you to already be infected. And they can issue a certificate, and this certificate can force medical examination and medical treatment that you must submit to. This certificate will allow a peace officer to apprehend you and to bring you to the facility, the quarantine place that they're going to erect or have an operation. And when you're there, the physician will be allowed to perform any test or any physical examination which is required to determine whether you have a communicable disease. And they can detain you at the facility for the period required to obtain the results of the examination. And the physician is allowed to treat or prescribe any treatment for you in order to render you non-infectious, with or without your consent, and to detain you for the purpose of forcing you to take this medical treatment. All it takes is for two physicians to certify that they believe that you are infected with COVID-19, or one false positive test from their test kits and one physician supporting that false positive, in order to order you and force you into medical treatment. And if you do not comply with the medical treatment, which includes immunization for the communicable disease, then they can place you into isolation and hold you in isolation until you either, one, comply and take the vaccination, or two, have caught the virus, have went through it, and have now produced sufficient antibodies where they can detect it, and they will let you go. Once you are in quarantine and you are being held in isolation because you refuse to undergo medical treatment that the physician is prescribing, then they are only under obligation to come and verify or come and check on you once every 7 days while you are in this quarantine camp or in this isolation camp. And their verification process is to see if you are going to comply with the medical treatment. Not if you're doing better, but if you're willing to submit and comply. And it seems that within this statutory power, until you submit and comply, they can detain you, unless you can prove to them that you're non-infectious. And the only way you can prove to them that you're non-infectious is through a medical laboratory exam. There is a way to defend against these operations of law that are being brought forth in the statutory power, which is trying to strip you of your fundamental right and force you to take a vaccination and force you to be quarantined and put into isolation if you refuse their medical treatment. Within the enactment itself, it states that if a certificate is issued against you, you can go to the Court of Queen's Bench and deal with this situation before a judge on the Court of Queen's Bench. Remember that this is a statutory law. This law governs, controls, and regulates classes of persons. If you look into this statutory law, you will see exactly what class of person they are trying to regulate. I will have more to say in my next coming video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you realize what's transpiring here across this nation called Canada, or this corporate body called Canada. Alberta is not the only province that are bringing forth these operations of law. These operations of law are being put forth by the legislators in most all provinces across this corporate body called Canada. They intend to force inoculation. They intend to force vaccination under the statutory power.